All right, greetings everyone. Welcome to The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body, and the Healing of Trauma by Bessel Kolk, MD. Um, Part 3 of the audiobook we're going to be covering today. But before we get started, I'm just going to play some Dr. Francis Chris Wilson and also just remind everyone why we're all here. And we're here to solve the greatest problem known to planet Earth, which is the system of racism, white supremacy. Um, More Black people, more non-white people should be attempting to solve the problem, and that looks like well, I don't know what that looks like besides Black people being serious thinkers and becoming constructive with their time and energy. So that's what we're here to do. We're here to produce this thing, this concept called justice, because it has never been on planet Earth, and this is, I believe, one of the reasons I was born into this universe is to help to solve the problem or solve the problem single-handedly if need be. So I'm gonna play on this Wilson clip. It's not the one I intended, but she says very little that is not critical and important. So let's give it a listen, and then after that, we're gonna start the audio segment of the book, which is about 1 hour. Hope everyone has your pen and paper for notes. As we're listening, use your brain computers. Um, Use your powerful brain computers to take notes so we can share with one another after the audio segment. I have mine right here. Let's say so. We're gonna play this audio clip. Let me know if you guys can hear it.
Instead of, putting the pressure on one man that he's supposed to solve all of
And I can
black
let that
people's
reaction.
problems, why
You can hear
don't
it.
we take the courage and speak
No.
I cannot hear anything.
racism, white supremacy? And
I
I'm
can
not
hear
talking
it.
about hating
Hmm.
Yeah, I can hear it also.
Okay. So
white people.
Mm.
does it sound like it's coming from my mic or from the computer itself?
Possibly
Com-
from your mic because it's not as loud.
All right. Let me let me stop the share. I'm gonna try to sort this out really quickly. But all right, this should solve that problem. All right, so this is the clip we're gonna listen to. Don't know how long it is because it's not the clip I intended, but I'll have an ear for when to stop it.
Why don't we take the courage and speak up about racism, white supremacy? And I'm not talking about hating white people. It's a waste of time to hate white people. White people have their objective: white genetic survival on the planet, which is why black people in this area of the world have experienced what they have experienced for 500 years. If President Lincoln, when he emancipated the enslaved Africans, if if the black people were given, now you're really free. We don't even focus on color. Forget color. We don't just human beings interacting. White would have disappeared. There wouldn't be white people in this area of the world if everybody was just relating based on human interaction. There wouldn't be any white people because they would have all been genetically annihilated by the dominant genetic ability to produce melanin pigment.
All right, that's a good time to end it. So the whites know what they're on this planet to do. It's to maintain this evil empire, vile system called racism and white supremacy. So it's been time non-white people, especially black people, realize what we're here to do, which is to produce this thing called justice. So I'm gonna start up the audio clip. I'm sure everyone is ready to get started. All right, audio segment part three of the body keeps the score starting now.
Does all the talking, the right half of the brain carries the music of experience. It communicates through facial expressions and body language, and by making the sounds of love and sorrow, by singing, swearing, crying, dancing, or mimicking. The right brain is the first to develop in the womb, and it carries the nonverbal communication between mothers and infants. We know the left hemisphere has come online when children start to understand language and learn how to speak. This enables them to name things, compare them, understand their interrelations, and begin to communicate their own unique subjective experiences to others. The left and right sides of the brain also process the imprints of the past in dramatically different ways. The left brain remembers facts, statistics, and the vocabulary of events. We call on it to explain our experiences and put them in order. The right brain stores memories of sound, touch, smell, and the emotions they evoke.
Alrighty, so my starting off note just be the small detail that was covered that talking, simply the act of talking helps to relieve the effects of trauma, and it could be easy as that as overcoming from one's traumatic experience and understanding those traumatic experience in a context that no longer makes the victim a slave to the experience, but the victim able to understand the experience and develop techniques and skills to counter it, as well as techniques and skills to prevent it from happening again. Mm, does anyone have any notes they'd like to share about what we just heard?
For me, one thing that really stood out with this section was, basically the whole title of the book, how the body keeps a score, and really, how trauma can manifest itself as like something physiological, but the symptoms start to appear, like physical symptoms start to appear when you don't treat or act upon the trauma, when you don't start addressing the trauma, all the kind of like the physical things that happen to me, like I had there was one part in particular. I have my notes in front of me right now, but talks a lot about the frontal lobe, the thalamus, those different things, and how they start to morph because of trauma.
Yeah, indeed, those things start to degrade, erode. Those things begin to lose their intended function. And that's just a good segue for me to just talk about the brain in general. So the brain should be seen as a like problem solving organ. That's we only have a brain to think to solve problems. But due to the system of white supremacy, we have been trained to use our brain for every and other thing besides thinking seriously, thinking consciously about how can we solve this problem of racism and white supremacy and produce justice. Um, and that brings me into the aspect of how the doctor writes about the brain. I'm always hearing the brain is like, split. There's like various aspects of the brain that help it to do various things. And I think that goes into the Yurugu mindset, having to separate everything and having to separate everything so it's easier to control the separate parts and whatnot. So I view the brain as something that is supposed to function as a whole. We're supposed to use all parts of the brain. There's supposed to be some sort of unity within our brain chemistry and our brain matter that allows it to do what it needs to do. We shouldn't have to rely on one portion of the brain or this other portion of the brain. We should be able to rely on all of it to do what it's designed to do, which is to solve problems. But due to trauma, it really retards the brain, which I'm sure we'll get into it soon. But trauma really retards the brain in its ability to come up with solutions, to be imaginative, and to be innovative, which are very necessary components to solving any problem, especially the problem of racism, white supremacy. I'll stop there and see if anyone has any notes to share.
I really, and I don't want to say what I found very interesting was what he was taught when he was talking about the frontal lobe and kind of like what happens when it's not functioning properly. I understand the frontal lobe to be kind of one of the last parts of the brain to develop, especially in younger people. I also understand that when your frontal lobe doesn't develop, it can you can stunt your certain activities such as like alcoholism or smoking a lot of weed, etc. So I've when he was talking about what happens when your frontal lobe's not developing or isn't functioning properly, and how that can lead you to being upset and irritated when a waiter like messes up your order, and how an a frontal lobe that isn't properly developed leads you to be irritated all the time, highly irritable. It kind of you can kind of see that within the black community, within black people being highly irritated with each other, being constantly upset, kind of almost blowing up for certain things. I don't want to generalize, but I found that part to be interesting because I feel that the frontal lobe is often a part of the brain that's talked about quite frequently.
Yeah, well said. The frontal lobe is integral into being able to produce harmonious relationships. Due to how blacks, non-whites have been trained, there's very, very little harmonious of anything in our so-called lives. So it's not generalizing this I don't think it's generalizing describing the behavior of black people in a truthful manner, which is quite dangerous, is quite pitiful and silly when looking at black people as a collective. This is what white supremacy has made us. It has made us, to quote from the book, creatures of habit, with superficial relationships, and that can be easily um, found in the majority of non-white communities, but especially black people, because black people aren't aware that they have been made creatures of habit, individuals who kind of just who just run on automatic. Very, very few serious thinking involved in how we go about our lives, which is why we hang out with people in places that don't have any constructive value, which goes into the superficial relationship. We spend our time hanging out with people who are gonna talk about us behind our back, or we're gonna create small beefs with.
You gonna come with me?
Um,
Are you ready?
I Miss Willis, you have a hand raised? So, creatures of habit. I'm sure we all have fell victim to this cycle. I myself, for sure, have spent my a lot of time entertaining superficial relationships where all we really just did is smoke together, drink together, try to have fun together. But when it was time for some serious thinking or reflection on why are we doing these things, those situations were quite rare. Um, and it's also important to understand how trauma just diminishes and destroys our creativity and innovation. I can't stress that enough, which is I think can be an indication of why people literally will spend their entire life doing the same exact thing, not even having the awareness that hey, I've been doing this my entire life, and I am quite miserable. I'm quite unhappy. What can I do to shift this behavior slash emotions I'm consistently filled with? But thankfully, due to white supremacy, there are many poisons we can consume that give us comfort, such as alcohol, such as um, things that we smoke, tobacco, etc. And he says that these chemicals they can help dampen the effects of trauma, but it's no treatment. It's not a constructive treatment to dealing with trauma um, at all. And did anyone want to comment, or can I continue with my notes?
I want to comment. The parts that I found the most interesting was when, wait, hold on. The parts that I found the most interesting was when he was talking about how in a traumatic experience, having some sense of like control makes you able to like process it and come with like solutions faster, or like at least process it, and how going through trauma makes you like unable to feel grounded. And when he was giving examples of feeling grounded, like feeling the chair on your butt, or like, you know, hearing the wind outside, it reminded me a lot of just like childhood and kids in general being like forced to like just like sit in classrooms, especially like kids who are going through a lot of trauma. And generally when you're a kid who's going through a traumatic experience, first, like if your parents are abusing you, or if you're seeing abuse, it's like you obviously don't have any control because you can't even leave the house or anything like that. So I feel like it even more like amplifies the feeling of lack of control and amplifies the feeling of like not feeling grounded. So I thought that was really interesting, and it just reminds me how like really messed up a lot of the institutions we have are, because they're not really adept at like dealing with the fact that a lot of children are dealing with daily traumas. So, and then another thing that I thought was interesting, he talked to something about like mimic neurons or something, and how like being around certain people, you start to mimic their personality, the way they speak, and how if you're around someone long enough, like you can mimic the way that they solve problems, the way that they deal with their trauma. I think that he was saying that children who watch their parents and like they basically watch their parents to see how their parents react to things. And I think that that's something that I picked up on, because in my family, like the parents do not react to even like the littlest of stressors in a constructive way. and things that are very small get blown up into like really big issues. And I think that for a long time, that's something that I was mimicking, that I had to like force myself to stop doing, even though I still do it a lot of times. And I thought too, the part about Otto, the person who got in a car crash and was going through the depersonalization, I was sad because it ended right when they were talking about hers, but that's something that I've experienced a lot, like feeling basically outside of yourself and numb. And when she was talking about, or when he was talking about why Otto went through that, I was like, oh my God, because that was basically like my childhood, where if my like mother was very angry with me for like little things and would just like scream or just talk down to me, make me feel like I was worthless almost. My solution was like, okay, well, just don't say anything. And I would just shut down and like stare off and just basically like not be wherever I was in that moment. And so that really rang true to me, because I think when I'm in a lot of moments that I don't even know if it's traumatic or if I'm just like hypersensitive to people, that if it is, I'll just shut down and like I won't engage in a conversation. And I think people interpret that as like you withholding something and almost like you being passive aggressive. But a lot of times it's just like, I literally can't speak right now because I can't move my whole body. Like I'm not even here. So I thought that that was like, that really rang true with me personally.
Well said, Miss Ash. I think that is very, very important share because, well, for me, it indicates that something I suspect to be very true, that all Black and non-white people are heavily, severely traumatized. We all have some level post-traumatic stress syndrome, which I suspect is the only way the system has been able to go unchallenged for so long and still on this planet, because we all have been severely damaged by racism and white supremacy, to the extent as you have mentioned. Um, so having a well functioning frontal lobe will produce an emotional brain that protects an individual's well-being. We see racism, white supremacy has trained non-white people to act on their emotions and very little thought. However, the emotions that we have been trained to act on very, very rarely produce constructive results in the form of us solving problems without creating more problems, or just extending or maintaining our existence, or not being killed under the system of white supremacy. And I think that also is just how damaged our brain chemicals are messed up, how damaged we are as a people. I know myself was had was very, very once short tempered. Like I broke in so many cell phones and controllers just by doing simple things like playing card games on my phone, and I would lose. Um, I remember one time I was in Berkeley and I was in a Yu-Gi-Oh phone like tournament on my cell phone, and I was doing quite well, but I lost one match, and I just got so furious that I like smashed my phone over and over against the floor and broke it into bits. And it's not the first time I broken my phone in that manner as well, which is an indication to me that not only was I not solving the problems, but I was repeating it over and over until I was better able to understand like that behavior and where is this anger stemming from, because it's certainly can't just be losing a card game. It had to be. It was something much more deeper, and it's just due to my training. I was trained to function in that manner, so I'm an easier target to be destroyed by white supremacy because black folk who operate on emotions only are the ones that find themselves in greater confinement. The ones that find themselves in jail are the ones that find themselves having a ton of children that they can't sufficiently take care of. So the emotional brain of non-white people needs to be heavily like retrained to be constructive. I think that can happen by just changing our thought, speech, and behavior. Also changing our diet and how we spend our time and energy. Um, the mirror neurons that you mentioned, I think is also very important, which is mirror neuron that was discussed in the book. How we mirror and we could sense how other people are feeling, and you take this phenomenon like mirror neurons into a place like South Central, you can understand why there's so much hostility amongst black people. Is because we're all just projecting our suffering and subjugation onto one another, which just we're all under attack. We don't know we're under attack. We don't know what to do about the attack. So therefore we produce and are led into the cycle of killing one another, uh, name calling one another, and all just mistreating one another in order to make our suffering more, um, in order to make our suffering something we can manage more, I guess. I know my frontal lobe was heavily damaged because this whole empathy thing, this whole sympathy thing, I did not develop that until my late 20s. The ability to care about other human beings, my bad, other victims of racism, white supremacy, because yeah, I know growing up, I had very few emotions. I know I definitely didn't care about people. That could be being conditioned in an environment where the loss of life was expected and somewhat like untalked about because people would die and then I would hear comments like, so and so got killed, and then that's the end of it. So hearing that over and over, I just began to understand that black people, non-white people dying is just something normal, and and something I did not care about until I was able to really understand how white supremacy has really made me quite a monster in regards of my emotional regulation. Because even I have a twin brother, and he even could have been slain by the system decades ago, and like my conditioning, I would have been like, well, another one bites the dust. But as I understand the system, I understand what's been done to me, so I'm able to develop new cycles of behavior, develop new thoughts and emotions that not only can serve myself but the whole of the planet by using my time and energy to produce this thing called justice. Because I don't believe people should have the thoughts that I have had, and I believe people should be subjected to the experiences I have had. Therefore, I think the best thing I could do with my time and energy is to work to produce this thing called justice so there could be no more monsters and monstrosities coming to planet Earth to terrorize its occupants, so we can have more sound thinking non-white people becoming more of a norm. So in effective numbers, we could really get this problem solved immediately. Uh, does anyone want to have any notes to share before I continue?
I can share. I have a few notes that I have written down here. One of the parts that stood out as well is that living in complex social networks, I think that like really struck home for me, is like always living in like this complex, like it's not always easy, like especially when you're sitting in a classroom or outside or going home, wherever, it's always felt like this almost like imaginary world where I'm like trying to escape all the time. So the way I would escape is like what would like take my mind off something easily. And for me, it was just like, oh, read a book or work and like, or a show or something to just like almost pretend that it didn't exist. And then I got so good at it that like, if a person did me wrong, I kid you not, I would act like this person did not exist. They would like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Like, who? Who's that? Like, I really, and I truly almost like, believed it. Like, I believed I didn't know this person. Like, I got too good to where it was like, dang, this person doesn't exist. I don't know who they are. Or like a situation would happen and I'll just be like, I'm an emotional person, so I wouldn't respond at that moment. Or if I did respond, it's like 1,000. Like I'm ready to hurt someone, 1,000. So like it was this a very like always walking on ice situation where it's like one moment I'll just act like someone didn't exist, or I'll act like a situation didn't happen. Or the next moment I'm like 1,000. And like I don't even remember what I even said at that moment of time too. I just like almost like black out, but I know I'm conscious enough to like walk away when I'm done speaking. So it's just like seeing how the trauma like almost manifests a certain way, until how I start responding to situations. Like even now, like if someone does, like if I get annoyed by someone or they treated me badly or there's some mistreatment, I really just act like they don't exist. Like that's the only way I know how to cope with it. And one, I don't really like conflict, and that's the only way someone would just stop talking to me. Because if I continue to like engage in some sort of relationship with them, it's like the conflict doesn't go away. Or there'll always be conflict because of their traumas and my traumas. And there's just so many things. And like I think now it's just at the point where like I always say it's like growing up. It's just I'm okay with being at home. But I think even just like little things where like if I tell someone like, oh, blah, 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 and then I have to repeat it again and again and again. Like after like 5 times, I shut off. Like, okay, I'm not talking to you about that anymore. Like that's dead. That conversation is dead to me. I don't want to be your friend. I don't want to, like, I don't want to even communicate. Don't text me, nothing, because it's just like how I'm wired. And then the thing about creatures of habits, one of the things too that came into habits was just like the idea of being organized. And I know it doesn't like seem like bad, like everyone's like, well, at least you're not on drugs or this and that, but it's like the idea of organized to the point where like I get too like caught up in the organization, how things should be in my brain, that like I can't see outside of it. So I just feel like there's just so many like different things that like leads me to respond a certain way. But I think now that I have miled down and got control of it, like, oh, I can still be organized. It's okay, but just not obsessed over it to a point where I think like the whole world should be just be in this organized manner. And obviously it won't be, because there's a lot of gray area. So there's just so many things that like filter into like how I respond. And now that I'm like dissecting it, it's just making more sense.
I wanted to comment on that because it really shows that we as Black people have not really been taught any ways to deal with trauma, or I guess some might call it coping skills. I just like Nanaya was saying, I too have also developed that habit or used that kind of tactic in the past, acting like somebody's not there. I went almost a whole year with out talking to my my stepmom because she did some foolish, I can't even remember what it was about, but the point is that I went around, we both lived in the same house and both acted like we weren't there together, or we didn't know each other for an entire year about. And that's not the first time that's happened. Uh, Oftentimes when people get upset, especially with me, like my attempted parents, they refuse to talk to me, or they act like I'm not there. They refuse to talk to me, and rather than discussing it or finding appropriate ways to deal with this, we tend to act like we're not there and we don't see each other. Kind of reminds me how we oftentimes try to deal with racism, just act like it's not there.
Yep. Well
My
said.
parents did the same thing to me. I think that's really interesting. Because they always would act like I literally was just not in the room. And when you think about it, like as a parent, you have such a responsibility because your child is going to function in society later on. Like if you don't teach them proper mechanisms to like solve conflict, like you're gonna like O5 was saying, you're gonna retard their growth, you're gonna retard their potential to just like live in the society in a way that's functional. So I think it's really interesting, like how certain people have kids but don't even think about that. And like now when I look back on it, like I would never give my child the silent treatment because one, it's like unconstructive, and two, it's really petty. But that was also a part of like my life too, where it's like, okay, well, I guess I just don't exist in this household anymore. And then it makes you feel like it forms an insecure attachment because you never know when you're going to be isolated from the group. And like we as humans are like group people, like we want to feel like we belong to some sort of group. And if you don't know if you're just going to be cut off from the group at any instance because of a little thing, then you don't even fully immerse yourself in that so-called family. You always have one foot in, one foot out because you have to run away. You know what I mean? So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Ash and Kwaku. That is a great example of how in the system of racism and white supremacy, these so-called attempted black parents, non-white parents, they treat their offspring like some sort of sophisticated pet that they just have to clothe and feed and make sure they're going to a place called school. But in terms of teaching the offspring how the world works, how the world is functions, and how they, due to their non-white skin, is gonna function, none of this is mentioned in the average non-white, especially black family hold, that we live in a system of white supremacy, which is why I can understand both of what was just shared. And also black people are not trained how to solve problems. So if you can't beat your offspring into submission and to following your will, then the next best thing is just to ignore this sophisticated pet that I brought into this world. So what we're dealing with is just really, really severe and the infinite manifestations of white supremacy. There's just that's just so pitiful to hear that. I am fortunate enough to come from a household where I was not given the so-called silent treatment, but again, I was not told the truth about white supremacy and racism. So still much to be addressed and fixed in black so-called families. The average white kid understands racism by age 3. So we need to start talking to our black children about racism, white supremacy as they're in the womb by saying you're coming to this planet to be a counter-racist soldier, a counter-racist scientist. You're not coming here to be a silly dancing slave addicted to material nonsense. You're here to be a serious thinker and to do some serious problem solving. If we are not able to solve this problem before they get here, this needs to be new language, new thought patterns that we are producing to our children. And if one cannot do that, then you really should not be bringing any more slaves to this planet. The last thing we need is more slaves coming to this planet to just be subjugated and dominated by white supremacy. I see Miss William has a hand.
Okay, sorry, I had my speaker on earlier and I didn't know that it would stop my voice coming through. But anyway, I paid attention to a few things, and one was, this is your brain on trauma. The body continues to keep the score, either in fight, flight, or freeze. And it makes a lot of sense when you look at that, because most time you always hear people always talk about the fight or flight, but they don't talk about the freeze, because that freeze is when you don't know what to do. You just in a state of shock, you know something is happening, but yet you can't move to do anything. And it makes me think about parenting, is that I can't say for everybody, but I can say for me, when I grew up, I'm the only child for my mother and my father. Now, my father had another wife later and they had children, right? But for me, being the only child, and the only time I saw other children is when I went to school or when I went to my grandmother's house, where she was raising 3 other children that were my aunt's children who had been previously killed by her husband because they had separated, right? So it makes me wonder and think about the fact that when you raise up in a society as non-white people, not really understanding what children are, because truly I never heard nobody really tell me what children were about. I'm serious. I just knew people were having children and people were happy that, oh, this one had a boy and this one had a girl. And I'm thinking that's the way the world functions. You have children and everybody be happy that you have children. And then I'm later finding out about the system of racism, white supremacy. I'm trying to figure, wait a minute, if I had known all of this, I wouldn't have wanted to have children. I just really wouldn't have. Because in this system, not being equipped to know how to fight this fight that we're battling to replace racism, white supremacy with justice, the worst thing you can do is have unequipped people. That you're gonna automatically lose the war because the people are not equipped. I notice how our military does when the soldiers go in for training. These people are trained, I think they have like a 6-week basic training, and this is basic. This is not the other stuff they're gonna learn, but this is basic. And when we look at non-white people, when we're producing these children, we don't even have the basic training. We don't, because a lot of time we're just having these children haphazardly, thinking they're little cute little toys and objects of our attention, and we bragging on them and putting all kind of ornaments and stuff on them, dressing them up. But we're not realizing we are at war. And at war, you don't decorate children. They're supposed to be productive soldiers in the war. So it just helps me to understand now that I can't tell people don't have children. They do what you want. That's your business. That's your body. But if we are going to continue to have children, knowing that the trauma that is going to face us as non-white people, while the system of racism, white supremacy is still in existence, if they're not going to be warriors, then it, to me, you just doing something. It's not productive. It's just not. So now with the knowledge that I have now, not like I'm going to have any children now, but it's enough information to help other people to pass on for them to take a good look at having children, because it's not going to stop your sexual encounter, but you can still have that. But think about the fact of what you're producing and why are you producing it. And I think a lot of us have not looked at why are we producing these children. And for the people that I know, they were not producing these children to be warriors. They were only producing these children because they thought it was the norm and this is what you're supposed to do. But We can't continue to keep living like that. And I noticed something else too when it says your brain, your emotional brain is the protector, and the rational brain is the logical side. But then I looked at that the emotional brain is not in opposition to rational thinking, which is your logic. So even though we may get emotional about something, we have to train ourselves. Yes, this is emotion. Yes, I'm feeling this, but we have to go a step farther and realize, is this logical what I'm thinking about doing in my emotional state? So to me, that's very helpful because um, the majority of my life, I have been a very emotional person, very, very, very emotional. And I don't think that I really looked very much on logic at all. But now that I'm looking at the system of racism, white supremacy, and I'm fully understanding what it is and what I have to do as a counter racist to produce justice, that it keeps me to the point I'm working on not being so emotional and looking at the logic versus reacting to my emotions without using logic. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Miss Williams. I love how you brought up the basic training, and yes, we racism is a war waged against all non-white people, started by white people, and we have just no equipment. We have no artillery. We have no defenses against this war. We're just literally bringing children to the slaughter. Is what having an offspring is, without knowing about racism, white supremacy, what it is and how it works. If we are participating in this behavior, we are doing nothing more than bringing children to the slaughter. And yes, an offspring is meant to be much, much more than a creature that you dress up in cute clothes and take lots of pictures of. Actually, that reality that I'm seeing is that a lot of people from my youth who have had offspring, they spend a lot of time dressing their children up in these elaborate outfits and taking a ton of pictures. And according to counter racist logic, that will fall under show offism and attention seeking. But we have to understand we've been trained to be a show off people and a people needing attention, needing acceptance, needing people to say, oh, that person is doing something funny, something entertaining. You know, that person looks nice in their clothing. This is what Black and non-white people have been conditioned to do. We've been conditioned to beg for attention, and we have come up with many, many, many silly ways of getting attention. We come up with many, many, many ways of showing off silly things, to the point where even our children have become some sort of accessories. You know, for example, if I have this really elaborate Nike's outfit, my child is wearing the same exact thing but a smaller version. That child is nothing more than a accessory to your own ego, to your own materialistic, brain trashed mentality. And this is just the war. I'm just reporting from the war and what our side is doing, and it's definitely destructive. So I really appreciate that analogy, that we're just not equipped and we're not training up enough counter racist soldiers. Because white people, they not only do they teach their children how to practice white supremacy racism, but 24/7, the TV, the news, the books, the video games, everything is designed to teach them how to practice white supremacy. Everything that we consume, that I just mentioned, is meant to teach us how to be victims, how to be subjugated, and how to essentially hate ourselves, and be addicted to being a silly, pitiful people, which white supremacy has trained us to be. So it's like white people are not going to help us. You know, they're winning the war for a reason, and we just need to just truly get serious about what's happening on planet Earth, because it's quite it is insanity 101. We cannot be functioning this way to not be an insane group of people, and to just the trauma of it all, like having post traumatic stress syndrome, which all black and non-white people have, I would suspect, just really makes you much easier to be dominated because you're not thinking straight. The smallest hiccup can produce you to want to harm someone. For example, you know, black person steps on another black person's shoes. The next minute, they're fighting each other. A black person not giving another black person so-called respect. They're killing each other over this thing called respect. I remember an encounter for me in high school, involving a racist suspect. For those of you who do not know what that term means, it's a white person who was able to practice racism. So this racist suspect, he steps on my shoes, you know, and I didn't care at all. You know, I really didn't care. But he just got so afraid that I was gonna like attack him or hurt him because he stepped on my shoes by accident. So I'm able to reflect on that and think, Jesus, it's a programming so embedded into society that black people are freaking so emotionally out of whack that that it is known even by this suburban white kid that stepping on a black person's shoes is dangerous. But yes, that's the reality we are living in. Not only do black people harm each other over material nonsense, we kill. We've been trained to kill each other over material nonsense, and this is system of white supremacy. This is very traumatizing to function in this manner. So yeah, I think we should all get comfortable understanding that we are heavily traumatized. And I want to talk about another thing Miss Williams mentioned about how we respond to these traumatic events, and how sometimes the body will react or sometimes it will not. I remember me and my twin brother walking to the store to get some milk, and I looked to my left and I see a shadowy figure with a cap on, aiming a weapon at a group of non-whites. And the moment me and my twin brother heard the shooting commence, we just we became so much in sync in how fast we ran and how low we were able to put our bodies. And it reminded me of another situation where I had to again run from from people shooting at each other when I was walking my middle school girlfriend home, and this black person um began to get shot at, and I ran really like gracefully to safety, really fast as I was programmed to do. But the friend I was with, it must have been one of his first traumatic experiences like that. He really when he ran, he immediately fell on the floor, and perhaps that's what kept him alive. But just how our body is programmed to react on this automatic thing, it would be so nice if we could program our body to react automatically to counter white supremacy, which is very possible if you follow a code, the counter racist code. And I'm gonna end it right there. I see Mr. Williams has a hand up. Mr. Eden.
Thank you, 0526. I apologize for coming for being a bit late, but I have the book and I will be joining future sessions on time. And 0526 said that this is an opportunity to share. And I'm from Jamaica. I'm living in Norway. And one of my, I've recently, my parents are separated and divorced. I have a brother and a younger brother and sister, and I'm the oldest. And when I think about trauma, one of the things that I would remember is being always tense when my mother would be coming home from work. Like she'd be coming home and I can hear the heels of her shoes coming home, and she would be upset if the dishes weren't washed or for something else, and she just wanted to be by herself, obviously. Didn't want to have to be coming home and cooking dinner or things like that. And I just remember her being upset a lot and unhappy. And I also think about, before our parents' marriage broke down, things were relatively okay. But afterwards, it was clear that aspects of their childhood affected them and caused them to have conflict with one another. My father, I think, my father's mother is not does not have African ancestry. So his father married a woman that is probably practically considered white or close to white in Jamaica back in the 1920s or 1930s. And I can see how this affected my father's ability to speak about racism. And father was the youngest in his family, and he had asthma as a child. And one of the things he told me was that his father probably didn't expect him to live, and had put a mark on a tree where he was and was saying like he hoped or expected him to live. He wasn't expected to live past that time period. It feels as if my parents had a bit of, what's that? Oh, my parents had a bit of a tough childhood growing up in the countryside of Jamaica. My father was the first in his family to attend college, or the first in our family that we know of so far, because it's quite likely that our family attended higher education in West Africa before slavery started. And my mother didn't attend, was unable to finish high school because she had to stay at home and take care of her brother and sister. And then so she married my father. They were high school sweethearts. Married my father after he finished local college. And that's how they started very young at 25. And because of Dr. Wilson's work, I decided, while I was reading Dr. Wilson's work, about a year or two after my family started to break down, and because I wanted to understand why is it so bad in the family, and yet when it's church time, when it's time to go to church, they're pretending like it's all good, and why is it we have this white Jesus? Actually, I didn't know that Jesus wasn't white until I saw that movie Malcolm X, I think. But I read, what I'm trying to say is that I recognized the way my parents were acting with each other and with me. Pretty quickly after reading the ISIS papers, I recognized that we're in a global system, and that and it helped me to be a bit more understanding and not get angry or fight with my father. And to start doing some things daily to reduce my stress. So, for example, instead of like taking 2 buses to school, I started to wake up early and walk to school on my own. And it would take an hour, but it would be a nice walk in relatively cool weather. And I would walk to school on my own, and then when I reached school, I would have had a gentle exercise, and I would meditate. And after a while, I started to use the little lunch money I had to take care of myself for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so my parents wouldn't have to think about me. I looked into a health food diet that I discovered through reading one of my father's books in his library. And yeah, so, but but even through all of this, I understand as I've learned more about my parents' childhoods and their families' histories. My sister says it's not good to look into the past, but I think it's important to have some understanding of the learned behaviors that our parents and that we ourselves pick up. And I remember actually I used to share the same bedroom with my brother, and I had a argument with him over a book that I think I felt that I owned and that he didn't own. And I stopped talking to him for a year while we're in the same room. And to this day, a relationship is still not good. I think I hurt him really bad, and although he doesn't say, and I really would like to, I'm working at trying to improve that, try to heal that relationship. But for me, not speaking to my annoying younger brother was a way to like maintain some sense of power or control over what was affecting me and my family. Unfortunately, I can see now, as I've been listening to this discussion, that there have been other times in my life where I've used the same method, the silent treatment that you talk about, as a way of protecting myself from maintaining distance. And I think the company, like having that silent treatment is a tactic to like protect myself from emotional pain, and the skill that would replace that and actually help to protect myself from emotional pain, but also not cause further pain, is by talking about what is it that I'm feeling and how that is, how someone else has acted that has hurt me, and by being able to say that to them. And in my family, that can be a bit difficult because, like I said, my sister has taken on this this statement from my mother, like not to go into the past and so on. But recently, like about 3 weeks ago, I had called her and we were talking. And I consider my sister. She's 8 years younger than me. I consider her like one of the most important persons in my life. Like, I helped to name her. I helped to raise her. I helped to prepare her for exams so that she could get into a good school. Like, I really sacrificed half a year to make sure that she could get into a good school. So we have a close bond and trust because of that experience. And we were talking, and she was she was a bit annoyed with some of the positions I was taking. Like, she don't want to talk about racism at all. She thinks she doesn't see how it has affected our life or our parents' life at all. This is a position I've held for like 24 years. Like, our father has been seriously affected by this white Jesus. Seriously affected by this white Jesus image. It's seriously and now after having some experience with white people and white women, I can say that this white mother that he had, or this mother that was not black, and this side of his family that is not black, further affected him seriously, and probably affected the way that he related with a black woman as his wife. But you know, they can't talk about that much. But anyway, so I talked with her, and what I decided to do in my, you know, as things got a little bit heated, or she was getting annoyed, I said, I just stayed with her, and I kept talking, asking her to talk about how she felt. And when I felt my own emotions going up, I paid attention to that. I took a deep breath, and I said about how I was feeling at the moment, but that I was committed to staying in dialogue about her, staying in dialogue about it. And during the summer, I had looked for a whole bunch of books on communication and how to have difficult communications and how to notice when you're out of dialogue and how to get back into dialogue. And I guess subconsciously, some of that stuck with me, and I was able to use a little bit of those techniques. Plus, like, just watching how my own heart rate and my own breathing was like rising or falling. Those were two very important things for me to watch. How is it my heart rate is? How is my breathing is when I'm in this challenging conversation? And so we spoke for about 2 hours. It was like after midnight in Norway. And she said later that she told our brother and mother that the conversation was therapeutical for her and that she appreciated it, and she hopes that we talk more frequently, which reminds me I should give her a call soon. But that's my experience with my family with trauma, and some of the things that I've tried to do to manage it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing not only your traumatic experiences, but also deep levels of Black self-respect is understanding that you have a body afforded to you to save some money and walk. You know, do what Neely Fuller suggests. You know, walk in the morning, listen to the nature, listen to if the creator has any words for you. So that's very on code, very codified, very thanks for sharing that deep Black self-respect. And also, yes, religion, the most powerful religion on the planet is racism and white supremacy, and that comes in a form of Christianity as well. And I am certain that your victim father being conditioned, being especially for that era that he existed in, I'm surrounded by so much hate coming from white people, but to still find themselves with a potentially a white person. I'm just it seems like he was potentially with a white person or a person who can function as white, which means that he was potentially engaging in cesspool sex, which is what the code calls it, which is whenever a white person and non-white person have any sort of sexual play, it does nothing, absolutely nothing to replace the system of white supremacy, and it just leaves that victim more confused and more potentially potentially to conjure more animosity for himself or for
His
Black people.
children.
Yep, for
His
things
children.
Black, you know, because um, white people are very secretive. We don't know what they talk about when we are not around. So I can only imagine what kind of messages he was getting from that non-Black person. And I'm sure a lot of it. No, I'm not sure. You just said
I
a lot.
found out recently, 526, from my second cousin, that side of the family came to Jamaica to be overseers
See, and that is just white supremacy 101. We literally, after slavery ended, we didn't stop having sex with the slave masters. We still, due to our training, think that having sex or being with white people will solve any problems. It may it may give you access to more material resources, maybe, but other than that, your mind, your soul and body will rot and decay because you cannot lay with the enemy and do anything of constructive value. I believe the record shows that. Look at many so-called celebrated black authors and writers who were with white people. You will often find their works to be very confusing or inauthentic when talking about the race problem. So, so a lesson I learned from that story is just do not engage with white people in any so-called romantic or relationships because it's very dangerous. And um, so thanks for sharing. Anyone want to comment?
Yeah, I wanted
But
to.
yeah,
I definitely wanted to add. Thank you. Please let me know if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Is it Eton? Yeah, Eton. Okay. Thank you for sharing. Some of the things that stood out as I was thinking, because one of the questions was, I study communication and I've always been like interested in how people communicate and how I communicate to others as well, and how people communicate to me, whether that's verbally or non-verbally. So one of my questions in my head were like, I often have times communicating to those who just don't get it, who just don't care. I don't know if anyone has communicated with someone who just doesn't care. And that conversation almost goes like sideways really quickly because nothing could be solved, nothing could be talked about because this person is almost exhibiting um, a way of just like letting everything out that they have instead of like having an actual conversation and actually wanting to solve a problem. And then with you talking, it just reminded me of like just letting the person just talk and not even having the conversation about whatever needed to be communicated. And that oftentimes is interesting because I don't have that many interactions with people because, as I mentioned before, I kind of just like stay to myself because that's how I feel I can reduce conflict, which it shows I have reduced lots of conflict because I don't talk to people. But I think like as I continue like with the new people that I talk to, it's like really just having someone just talk instead of me talking or responding or communicating what I want to say. And then sometimes I think it's just like really just saying fewer words. And I know like from reading Mr. Neely Fuller's book, we talk about saying less and thinking logically, especially when responding. And if you can respond with one word or two words, just do that instead of like communicating, especially if you know conflict is rising. And I think that is where I've come to where it's like, okay, this person is just not going to get it. It's just like really saying that in my head, okay, I'm just not going to waste my energy. And then just like sit there and then say, okay, thank you. And then like continue on. And I think like sometimes I get like passionate as well, where it's just like, this person is like spouting nonsense, but I just like, it just doesn't logically make sense. And then it's just like, obviously the whole conversation would just blow up. And I had another point. And I think like one of the things too is like what stemmed from like childhood is like the idea when I said like the silent treatment, but the idea of like not being heard, like that was my thing. Like I just felt like as a kid that I was just not being heard in every area of my entire life. Like no one could ever hear me. So that's the reason why I drove, or like I had the like fire, I guess, to like just be top of my class, to be top of everything, to do my best in everything, to always be on top. Just because I know like if I'm the first one, no one can just mute me. And then I've always like been the outcast too, especially when it comes to like thinking logically or like being different. Like I've always been so different from everyone else. So I always felt like there was like me inside of a bubble and then everyone else. It's like everyone can relate to each other and connect with each other and do things together, but then there's me, and I just cannot relate with anyone. Like, okay, this just doesn't logically make sense in my head to like do those things or act that way, or just I couldn't really relate with anyone. And I think like that has led me to always say like, yeah, I know I'm so different. Like if you hang out with me, you probably know I say that a lot. Like I know I'm different. I know I'm different. I know I'm different. Because I truly am. Like logically, I feel like I'm just different from everyone else. Like everyone could just like, oh yeah, jump off a bridge, yeah, woohoo, with each other. But I just logically cannot say that or do that. And it's like doesn't make sense, But that's just like one area. But it's just thinking about it now is just like, especially people who are obviously showing that they're hurt, like especially like trauma. Everyone's like has been dealing with trauma, so it's like someone who hasn't dealt with their trauma or thought about their trauma, and almost like communicating with them is just a like trigger for me. Like I just cannot talk about it because it just like doesn't go anywhere, and I just start getting mad. But yeah, thank you, Etan, for talking about the communication aspect of it, because I think that's very important, especially when you want to share things about racism and white supremacy with someone who hasn't even dealt with trauma. Is really hard because they're almost like double barrier, or even like their burdens is so much higher, strong or heavier, because they're haven't dealt with their trauma, which is literally face front and like in their face all the time. But then they're talking about this thing called racism, white supremacy, and we're saying like, hey, this is the cause of that though. But it's just like almost like they can't really understand that because they can't even get past of like what's right in front of them. So it's just understanding that. Thank you.
Can't get past what's right in front of them, which is always the system of white supremacy. Thank you, y'all. And to answer your question, as a person who was once a hard-headed Negro, meaning not a person any person should have spent a lot of time talking to, because I just didn't care, I don't know how many people, actually no one has tried to teach me about the system of white supremacy. I had to kind of like get kicked around enough until I stumbled upon this thing on my own. But when I was like being told like constructive information, a lot of times I did not care, and I think that's because it's part of our training. We're just so well trained and just not to care about constructive information, and also to not care to receive any criticism, any suggestions of what one could do differently. So I think it's just best to reserve one's time and energy for the people who like show that, hey, I could use some constructive help, and I'm asking you for the constructive help, or to offer help whenever you can, without the expectation that this person is gonna become serious, become constructive, or become useful in this war being waged by white people against us. So just eliminating all expectations from Black people, non-white people. Understand our potential is infinite and godly, but due to white supremacy, we should not expect that from one another. We should expect what white supremacy has done to us to manifest whenever interacting with other non-white people. So give help when you can, but engage with other non-white people with zero expectations of them being able to become attempted counter racist or counter racist. Um, Hope that answers the questions to the question. Um, Mr. Eaton, he when he was talking about his situation, he mentioned what the book briefly introduced us to, which is like regulation of trauma techniques one being top down, one being bottom up. Top down being like um, meditation, yoga type stuff, and bottom up being recalibrating like the nervous system through like breathing, moving, and touch. And I recently have also not recently I started practicing on a bottom up technique when I began to get more familiar and this war and just how much of a relief from anger and stress that I could get from just taking a deep breath is incredible. And I'm like, wow, it's this simple to like maintain my emotions and feelings. I just have to take a couple of breaths, and that will do a lot to control my mood. No wonder white people are hiding this information from us because they can't have us in good health. They can't have us um, thinking clearly because if too many black people are thinking clearly and managing their stress well, this system of white supremacy will be gone overnight. Um, but there you have it. We live in a system where we're constantly under attack, constantly dealing with stress and trauma without the ability or knowledge on how to deal with it. Thus the system is in its circular pattern of establishment, maintenance, and refinement at the cost of our infinite subjugation and suffering until we replace it with justice. So yeah, I would hope that the folks who find their way to this video research just techniques in dealing with our post traumatic stress syndrome, because as I've been saying this entire meeting, I believe every black person, no, I know every black person is traumatized because you are born into a traumatizing system called racism and white supremacy. Would anyone like to share any more notes? Kind of yeah. Another. This would be my last note that I jotted down. Is mindfulness. You know, and just the ability to to practice mindfulness. Um, we have been trained to be the total opposite of mindfulness, and I think that is what the author described as conditioned animals. I think that's a good description for non-white people. We really have been trained to be very, very, very animalistic, and I mean animalistic by like how white people are able to predict what we're gonna do by how they're interacting with us. They're able to predict how we're gonna react to the various aspects of the system. They know what makes us angry, happy, sad, and cry. So white people have this thing figured out. We're just the ones who are very, very late to the war. So if no one has any more notes to share, we could think about getting into closing comments.
I have something to contribute. There's a book I read some time ago of Water and Spirit by Malidoma Some. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I recently purchased that book, and I do believe we will be reading it for the book club because it is quite a powerful read. So
Excellent, man. I'm at the right place then, because
you definitely
because I'm on my second reading. I think I've finished. I'm at like chapter 2 or something. But his story is all about trauma. I mean, he is um the setting is when it's in Burkina Faso, that's near in the inner part of Western Africa, and his father is enamored with white people and white Jesuits, and gives him away to a white Jesuit seminary to be trained as a priest. But before he's given away, he has spent a significant amount of time with his grandfather. And there are very few. If you've been in the alternative movement, I see a lot of material about Indian um, healing and like yoga, and a lot of material in the alternative movement sources its material from indigenous practices or traditions in India or in Europe or Native America, almost everywhere but Africa. No, there's like you don't get any information about the healing practices of voodoo or opium or any of the other traditional practices. So far, I've only learned of two African shamans. This man, Malidoma Some, who has written this book, and another one named Credo Mutwa from South Africa. And but this book is amazing, and I'm already signed up for that book club reading, because the journey that he takes he's sent away to the seminary, and that when he comes back, he is the elders in the village reintegrate him into his identity as an African person. And some of the technology that they talk about there is light years ahead of whatever we will find in the Western society. The technology that they have for healing somebody's psychology and psyche in our traditional African societies is light years ahead. I suspect it's only been done in probably very secret parts of the CIA or MI6 have openly discussed this kind of technology. But traditional African societies, right now in Africa, there are many places that are practicing the same technology. So we have a lot of, and this is our people, where we're coming from. So this is technology that they've practices and rituals that they have designed that actually work with us. So I'm looking forward to reading that book. I just want to recommend it even further. I think, and I will continue following this. I just want to say there's, and we have seen examples from, if you listen to Dr. Wilson on YouTube, she provides examples of Black self-respect and how you can manage their stress levels in a system of white supremacy. And I take that if you look at Mr. Neely Fuller's example right now, the way he lives right now as a counter-racist, he also provides a good example of how to live simply and focused as a counter-racist. Gus Renegade seems to be another one. And I suspect many of us right here in this chat have some practices, but yeah.
Yeah.
First, recognizing that there's a problem. Thank you.
Yeah, I suspect Neely Fuller's book and himself is definitely a way to reach a long existence if that is one's goal. Yeah, I definitely believe the code book will take any person exactly where they want and need to be if they have the will to do so. Well, we must understand white supremacy has really, really done an awesome job at destroying our wills and really replacing our will with silly wants and silly habits that can all be understood if you understand this system we are conditioning. And so I forgot to share this note. So it says that the frontal lobe is also responsible for how we relate to one another and how we like experience um, empathy towards one another. And I suspect for many years why I didn't have empathy for other human being for other people was because I was so used to laughing at the mistreatment of black people, non-white people, or just laughing at violence from cartoons and TV shows. I remember laughing in first grade while my white supremacist teacher um, was throwing me across the classroom. And I mean that literally. I was thrown across the classroom by a white supremacist. But during that process, I was still laughing. And that can be an indication of the insanity we are born into and that we adapt into our own psyche. And just how white supremacy makes mistreatment and violence fun and funny, even if sometimes it's happening to oneself. So um, the frontal lobe and myself in my youth was heavily damaged. I am glad that I have corrected a lot of its faults due to existing in truth and seeking truth and practicing my own self-respect, which is by not lying to myself, not living in any fantasies. I am very, very clear in my understanding that I am in a prison camp and I don't strive to be happy. I don't strive to find black joy. I strive to produce justice immediately because I know it's very possible. And as this definition from Dr. Francis Wilson says, it's more of us, non-white black people, than white people. So logic tells me that okay, we already have the numbers. We just need enough number of people becoming codified, following code, and not following people or trends, but logic and a code that Neely Fuller has produced. So, yeah, doing stuff like this, like just talking about our experiences, does a lot in this counter war area. It also does a lot to just mend our own traumas, whether we can feel it right now, or maybe during our reflection, or maybe subconsciously or unconsciously, we are helping to mend what's been done to us. At least that's what I suspect. But nonetheless, white people, white supremacists especially hate that black people are coming together to share constructive information and to speak truth about the system that we were born into. And for those racist suspects who frequent this channel, do not be mad at any black people in this channel or any black person who may have harmed you. Blame yourself and the white people who allow this system to exist on planet Earth. Um, we're just doing our job, which is trying to solve the problem, and all people should be trying to produce justice, white, non-white, collectively. Um, Boom, boom. Yeah, so I don't have any more notes to share. If anyone does, be my guest, or we can move into closing comments.
One thing I wanted to add was just, the silent treatment came up a lot. And really talking about silent treatment and just how that can kind of lead people to allying with white racism, white supremacy, not finding the comfort or the emotional, there's a word for it, can't remember right now. But the emotional maturity basically what your parents or your attempted parents are supposed to be giving you as a child. The silent treatment can lead them into going and seeking out allies of racism, white supremacy, therefore falling into a lot of unconstructive tasks, unconstructive activities, etc. Me myself, I was a victim of that. I found myself spending a lot of time with some of my old white associates, getting into a lot of nonsense, not realizing my position as a prisoner of war as well. Um, that's what I wanted to add with that. And I also related to what Eton was saying, as far as his mom and everything. I frequently dealt with that, and my response to that was, hiding, getting out of the way, just not being anywhere in the area near them. Therefore, I didn't have a lot of interaction as a child with my stepmom at that time. And I think it definitely shows, because I don't know. I don't think we could. Maybe we could have never had that kind of relationship, but I think we don't have the relationship that we should because of racism and white supremacy, and because of those interactions as a child that I had as a child.
Yeah, that reminds me of how historically white supremacy racism has often isolated black people from one another, often prevented access amongst black people, especially families. So this could be a manifestation of that. Historically, it could be incorrect, but that's what comes to mind. Just isolating the black person who is the problem. Um, Say that black person, talked to the slave master in a tone that was a bit too masculine. That black person will be isolated and prevented access from the other slaves. So that's what that behavior reminds me of. Um, any more comments, or should we get into closing comments?
I see Miss Williams has her hand raised.
Oh, Ms. Williams, please go ahead.
I was thinking the silent treatment, and I had to think, when did I remember that? And then I remember I've been doing it all my life. But I realize now that I did it more in the light of from the counter racist code, no contact, no conflict. But I didn't even realize that's exactly what that was, because I knew that if I don't talk to this person, there will not be any conflict, right? And the longer I talked to him, it would be more conflict. But I had no idea that silent treatment was what I was doing that for. But it just reminded me, through talking to this and thinking through this, that that's a protective measure, not so much always to punish a person, but to make sure that you're just not constantly arguing with our own people, right? And that can become a very emotional to keep allowing yourself to be treated that way. So I found that to be kind of effective for me. But I will take to heart that it does affect people. That is better that when you can try to talk with the person, right? But when you realize you can't, the best thing I would think is the constructive thing is to do is eliminate the contact. So maybe at a later time that you can reach out and you can communicate effectively.
Well, I think there's ways of going about it. Because if it's like a parent-child situation, then I don't think there's any way that that's like the right way to act personally. But I think if it's like relationships outside, because like the parent-child, you made a decision to have a child, therefore you've made a decision to like nurture that person and make sure that they're able to function in society. So like, I don't think that there's any situation where that's like applicable for the parent-child. But I think for like people with like just day-to-day interactions with other people, I think even if you're gonna not talk to them, I feel like you should at least tell them like, right now, this situation, I'm too like emotionally heated or charged right now. And I need to come back when I'm ready to have the conversation in a way where we can like be more vulnerable and not be like heated. I feel like you should at least give that person that information, because if not, then they're gonna always take it as, oh, like it's something wrong with me. I did something wrong.
Yeah, I would have to agree on that. Also, too, you mentioned the emotional brain. I can't really remember too much about what he was saying, but I wrote down that the emotional brain tends to look out for your best interests, and how that is how the emotional brain, when it's not functioning properly, can really take over your brain and kind of your actions, which kind of relates to how non-white people are functioning under racism and white supremacy, just overly emotional without attaching logic to any of those emotions for the most part.
Okay, I think we can get into closing comments now. Um, would anyone like to start? Bum, bum.
I can start. Just to close off, I'm not gonna just say like this is a great conversation, but I think one of the things that I enjoy most about this is like being able to like think through the trauma and not just like only. The only time I'm facing my trauma is when it's a trauma flare up. You know, I'm already in the motions of dealing with it, because sometimes like you might do something and you're like, oh, it's just like there's a reason why I'm doing this, because it's like trauma, but you might not know it's trauma until like later on. But I think now like having this like process to think right now through trauma and not really associate it to a moment that I'm experiencing it or it's a trigger for me. And I think like one of the things too with this discussion is just to be okay with like some communication when needed. Like me, I'm not going to communicate to someone who's just not getting it. And I think like that just a shutdown for me. Maybe it's just my, I don't want to say that, but it's just me. But I think opening like those conversations and then giving it the opportunity to like take course and then deciding if I want to proceed with the conversation, instead of like completely saying I'm not going to have that conversation with this person because it's like almost like I already know what's going to happen. But I think just really thinking about like how trauma affects me and then interacting with others, and then deciding, especially since I am attempted counter racist, it's like I almost want to talk about it all the time. Every sentence, all the thing I'm talking about. You know, and then I have people who are just like, as others mentioned, in their family who are just not, who just don't want to talk about it. You know, it's like almost like, do you not like, it's not affecting you? Like, how do you get to not be affected, you know? So it just makes me question a lot of things, but it also just makes me like think about a lot of things. And I still have to say, like, I like the idea of just like not really being around people, honestly.
Minimize contact, minimize conflict. Anyone else like to share a closing comment?
I'll go next. I guess my closing comments is that I'm really appreciating these I guess book club meetings. I feel like it's really helpful. I think that the book is always gonna fall short because most of the people that he uses as examples are like white people who are going through like extremely traumatic instances in their lives, that but there's still like white people who live in New York City who like live with some sort of modicum of like safety and wealth. And so I think it is interesting that I think it's really good to have this meetings because we're able to apply what we're learning in this book to understanding like the traumas of existing as like a non-white person under white supremacy, because the book is never really going to get into that because I don't think he has the capability of.
Alrighty. So, would anyone like to go? Because Ms. Williams, is this your closing comment hand?
Yes, it is. I too am grateful for this book club, especially this particular reading. So too often, trauma is the last thing we want to talk about because we realize it's painful. But I'm finding this book, the more we get into it, this is our third session, if I remember correctly, that it appears that when we first started, it was quite painful. Then the second part, it was a little less painful, but it was still painful. Now, this one came a little bit easier for the trauma side of it. Not saying that it's not traumatizing, but it was a little easier to talk about it. And then I realized too, like the lady before me was saying, that this book, in some ways, it helps us because we get a chance as counter racist people that we can talk about this among ourselves. But if we were looking at it specifically from what he was saying, as white people going through that trauma, it wouldn't help us very much, simply because we realize that we're in two different categories of our trauma. These are people, white people who have money, who have fame, who have whatever, but yet they're going through trauma. But we're the ones who are lacking with what we should have in the balance of people activities. And yet we are going through a trauma too, but they're refusing to talk about ours. So when we can get together and talk about the trauma that we face, it's so much easier because it doesn't eliminate the fact that we have the trauma, but it just makes it to the point where we can talk among ourselves about it, and then talk in a way that when other people listen to this, then maybe it will help them to deal with their trauma as well. Because as long as this system of racism and white supremacy exists, we're going to constantly be traumatized. So trauma is not something we're going to stop talking about because it's constantly happening. But that's the reason why it's important for us to not forget why we're here, why we were put here on this planet. And even though we might not have known it from the beginning what we were here for, now that we do, we have to have the encouragement and willpower to see this thing through. And to that point, that using our time and our energy as much as we can to produce justice, guaranteeing that no one is being mistreated. I mean, I'm saying no one, I mean everybody is not being mistreated, and that everyone who needs help gets the most constructive help. That's our overall goal, not hatred for anyone, is wanting to be treated like people are supposed to be treated where we can be developed into the universal man and the universal woman that we were designed to be on this planet. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Williams. I was reading the definition that I have on the screen, and I didn't notice the typos until now. I'll fix that for the next one. But thank you for that, Miss Williams. I'll share my check my closing comments, which will be coming from the word guide, Neely Fuller's word guide, and it's just something that I think will be very insightful for those to hear and then get introduced to this word concept. So it's from 271 and the word guide, and the word is on automatic ratio, and the code says use this term to apply to all of the effects that the system of white supremacy racism has on its victims, non-white people, by causing its victims to automatically say and do things again and again and again that do not produce constructive results. Notes: white supremacists, racists make it their business to train their victims, non-white people, to react to every situation in a manner that causes their victims to do more harm to themselves than they do to the system of white supremacy racism. A skilled white supremacist takes great pride in his or her ability to predict with great precision what it is that a non-white person will do or say and will not do or say in most or all situations. A skilled white supremacist racist usually knows exactly what a non-white person is thinking about. They usually know what to do or say to a non-white person or about a non-white person, the things that will make that non-white person be calm, sad, be happy, or be ferociously angry. All of these reactions are designed to be for the benefit of the system of white supremacy racism. The white supremacist racists make a precise study of a non-white person's strengths and weaknesses. They usually make sure that they know more about that non-white person than that non-white will ever know about them. The white supremacist racists. The white supremacist races are usually the masters in the science of getting a non-white person to talk about their personal feelings in regards to any or all topics in all the 9 areas of people activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor law, politics, religion, sex, and war slash counter war. They are usually the masters at getting non-white people to do things out of emotions rather than the use of logic. Suggestions: stop being on automatic in support of the system of white supremacy racism. Be a keen observer of what others are doing and saying. Listen to others, but always try to say no more than is necessary. When speaking, always do your best to put everything you say in the form of a question. Make a record of the answers you receive. Be calm, take notes. Never express anger or use curse words or profanity towards others. Always think, always think, and think again before speaking, writing, and or acting. So again, that was from the code book, and the word is on automatic racial. That's my closing comment. Would anyone else like to share their closing comment who hasn't gone? Miss Tracy, Mr. Kwaku.
For my closing comment, very constructive dialogue held here. Each book meeting discussion, I am learning new ways to deal with trauma and I guess better identify it. I look forward to future meetings. This has been very constructive. Thank you.
Miss Tracy, would you like to share a closing comment? Bum, bum. Alrighty. Think that will. Well, Miss Eden, did you have a closing comment for us? I know you joined late, but you can still do a closing comment.
Going to be going to be um going reading the book to catch up to where we are. But there's something I would like to say that there's a point that I saw in the book where it said that the key to healing is understanding how the human organism works. And this book and Western science will have some component, some fraction of knowledge of the human organism. And I look forward to this future book of Water and Spirit because I think there's value there. And I think there's also, I think we ourselves have some, I don't think we come from a people that's been on the earth for a very long time. And I think some of this knowledge still resides in us, even if we don't consciously have access to it. And so although we are victims of racism and white supremacy has been going on for the past 500 years, or as African people, we go back thousands of years. And I think that some of this knowledge resides in us still. And there is research that shows this as well. So I have faith. And I also, from what I've heard from Dr. Wilson, like we have the solution within us. Within and every problem lies the solution. And the key to healing is understanding how the human organism works. This was really constructive for me. Thank you for listening to my story. And I will be at the next session. Thank you. 0526.
Thank you, and thank everyone. Again, this is not work for the week. Discussing this area, discussing white supremacy in this matter always falls under counter war. So um, really pleasant and constructive to have a group of attempted counter racists attempting to solve the problem and share constructive information with not only those amongst this call, but those who may find them ways to this broadcast. So again, thank you everyone, and I'm gonna end it there. Bye.